Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Level Up podcast slash live stream. I'm Emily. I'm your host for today. And we have a lovely guest here to talk about what it means to build successful developer programs. So Richard, I will let you introduce yourself and we can take it from there.
Yeah, I'm Richard. I'm the director of BCamp, which is kind of a modern take on a developer bootcamp. And I think about it as like if a hackathon and an internship had a baby. So I haven't seen anything exactly like it. And I think we're trying to adapt it to the needs of emerging technologies like blockchain and some other things as well. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hackathon internship had a baby. I guess can you dive in a little bit about more what that means? Probably give some more details about B Camp overall structure for those of us unfamiliar.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds great. So really the idea for B Camp emerged actually in educating my own kids. So we sent our kids to too many schools to count, unfortunately. That we ended up homeschooling our kids. And what we found through this process is that there's actually so many more resources today to actually learn the actual knowledge. When I grew up, and I'm going to date myself, we didn't have Google. You couldn't just search something and have knowledge at your fingertips, let alone AI and YouTube and all of these other resources that allow you to get the information that you need. It had to come from a teacher or somebody else. And what we found is that there's just so many resources available, and and the blocker was actually the motivation for our kids. If they wanted to learn, they can figure out how to learn. They can find stuff on YouTube, and we got some programs where they could learn math and English, and if they were motivated, they could go way faster than they could learn in school because all that information's there. These programs are adaptable. They learn, based on what problems you miss, and they reinforce that stuff before you move on. I mean, it's just completely different education, and we get tons of data about what they were doing as well. So anyway, through that experience, what stuck out to me was it's not the actual content anymore. That's sort of like a commodity now. What's needed is the motivation. And so in my own experience, I love hackathons because that's like a place where you can come in and it's really motivating to go in and like learn something new in a hackathon because there's competition, there's other people there that you're connecting with and getting to know. And so the the problem that I ran into with hackathons is that it's actually pretty hard for, like, take blockchain for example, to take like a traditional developer and join a blockchain hackathon. There's like a lot of like activation energy that needs to happen for that to be successful. A couple things. One, they don't know what are relevant challenges in blockchain because they just haven't been around in the space. Two, they often don't have that many friends. They might have one friend or something who sort of like introduced them, but they don't really have necessarily a community to continue. And these are really important things in terms of motivation. If you don't have a good challenge to work on and you don't have other people to work on it with, there's a really good chance that you're not going to continue working on that. And there's exceptions. There's people who will just like latch onto something like a dog on a bone. But I think for a lot of people, it's really hard to make that leap. And so,
Yeah.
kind of based on this hackathon idea, but incorporating some ideas from like a traditional internship, because internships are cool because you're working with an actual company, and so usually they at least have some sort of relevant project, even if it's boring. It's relevant, useful, and And it also provides an opportunity to connect with people. And so we sort of combine these two ideas where BCamp, it's a 6-week developer program, and it runs a lot like a hackathon, where we're not like doing lectures about how to code in Solidity. Basically, we have some prerequisites. We're like, go do speedrun Ethereum, and if you have questions during the process, we can, if we can answer it, we answer it, and if we can't, then we have connections where we can point people to get deeper knowledge. But basically, it's 6 weeks, and the whole goal is to build a working prototype. And so we partner with organizations within the blockchain ecosystem, and they provide the challenges. So we have preset challenges. We'll have 6 to 10 projects, and then when people come in, we'll recruit 30 to 40 developers, and we do sort of this like fantasy football draft a little bit, and let people show their preferences. We assign everybody a team, and then we're like, go build. And then a couple more things. I'm going on and on, but a couple more things that I think are important to this are we break it down. We break down the development process into bite-sized chunks. And so week 1, we're like, don't do any coding. Just focus on a proposal and why this project, like really understand the challenge that the company provided the challenge, but there's a lot of additional research. Like, why haven't they done it already? Like, understand what the real challenges of making a solution. What does an ideal solution look like? And then what's the impact to that organization? Really detailing that stuff and trying to come up with an architecture. And then we go into writing pseudocode and fleshing out your architecture, go into writing production Solidity, into get some experience with the front end and security. And we'd sort of break it up like this over 6 weeks. Again, that just makes it easier to keep going if you're not overwhelmed with like trying to build the whole project and you're just taking the next step. And then the last thing is we have everybody present live every week on their progress. So there's nothing like, for lack of a better word, like, a little bit of the fear of presenting people to motivate people to make progress on their projects. And so, this works wonderfly, where, they might procrastinate, but they will get something done in the first week. They will have a proposal to share and after the first week. And again, when we break it down and we provide these motivations, and then again, we assign everybody a team. We have some ways for them to get to know each other. So this also, again, provides motivation. So once we do that, it's amazing actually what people can build in 6 weeks with this structure in place. And, this environment designed to help make it feel more natural and exciting to build. It's awesome to see what people can build in 6 weeks, even if they're brand new to Web3.
Yeah, yeah. You said a lot of things I resonate with. And I think it's important to dive later on. Like content is a commodity. I think like is a concept that's a little hard to swallow sometimes, as a content creator.
Well,
But it's
certain types of
yeah, yeah,
content,
yeah.
because on the flip side, it's maybe bifurcated.
Right.
That's certain types of if you're just learning a skill, but if you're actually doing thought leadership and creating a conversation and stuff, then I think
No, 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 no. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, learning Solidity and all of that is like very basics, reproducible. I think the part about incentives was really interesting, and motivation, right? Like maybe diving into BCamp, right? Like what is the incentive and motivation for devs to participate? Like how did you create that?
yeah, we target actually people who are looking to get a job. So we're targeting and usually what that means is it's people who have already some experience in Solidity. They've already played around enough, and where they're like, yeah, I would really be interested in making a career transition here. And or some students who are nearing the end of their time as a student and are having to make a decision. And so we're targeting people who are looking for jobs.
Right.
And
Yeah.
this is really motivating as well. It's like, come in, and again, this is, I think this works well because you get to interact with actual companies. You get to build your resume. It's free for the developers. So I'm a believer in like making education free for people, especially because some people, you know, we want to get the best developers regardless of whether they can afford to pay for
Yeah.
it. So
No, that makes complete sense. I feel like it's I think there's two approaches to, well, I've only known of one approach, I think, to keeping consistency in terms of developer engagement throughout programs, which is, I think, the standard, oh, if you pay a bunch of money for a program, then you'll be more likely with regards to like retention and finishing. We know that doesn't work because I pay for my gym membership and I still haven't gone to the gym, right? But yeah, and it's easy, I think, to hide. But when you add in that live stream component, the kind of responsibility of people to show up every week, I think there's no pressure like peer pressure. Like even monetary pressure, you can kind of like put in the back of your head and push away. But like, I don't know, someone be like, Emily didn't come to our weekly sync and had nothing to do. And she's I think that's a really strong factor. But also I think really great in terms of community building as
Mhm.
well, as you mentioned, right? Like needing, I think, friends to kind of support you along the way and get excited. Um, BCamp felt very similar to my own personal journey,
Mhm.
as a developer, starting a bit in the classroom, like very project-based work. I think the incentive part of like, my professor, I have this due date that I have to like finish by. Yeah, and then, the entire goal of like going to school was to get a job, right? And like how I select my educational program, or in this case, my university, is how well it connects me to those opportunities later on, right? So
Mhm.
I think B Camp really captured traditional education in a way that is a lot more accessible and probably can move a lot faster in terms of what you provide as compared to a normal university, which I'm assuming you probably just discover through your journey with your children, right? Given that the inspiration matches. I don't know, my vibe. Traditional education, kind of similar, but making it better through online. Um,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You mentioned a couple things like the speed at which you can learn. I think this is really important because, and this is from my own experience. In some ways, I feel like my college education was just a huge waste of time. You know, and and honestly, the funny thing is, I still think it was really worth it. It's still valuable, even though it's so inefficient. Like,
yeah.
um, because of the things you mentioned, because there's not a lot of other ways to make connections with potential employers and practice and like, build a project in a structured environment. But this, like, yeah, this is, from my own experience. Like, I love school. I loved being in school, and I look at it and I'm still like, wow, it's like so inefficient. It's so expensive. It just,
yeah. Yeah, no, definitely speaking from, I think, an American point of view here of college education being so expensive. I mean, but regardless, like inefficiency in terms of time, right? Yeah, like
Mhm.
ultimately I used it to get my computer science degree. And am like now in engineering and working here, but I have quite a few friends who made the pivot into engineering via like a 20K couple week boot camp. And
Mhm.
we got to the same place in a
Yeah.
much shorter amount of time and for significantly less capital. But I think there's trade-offs everywhere. But to the
Yep.
point of like, if you're just going there for what you need is like the simple and dirty. I don't want to describe educational programs as that. If you don't care about like the fluff of like, oh, I'm making my friends for the rest of my life in these 4 years where, I'm worried for or something like that, then yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's why college for me was such a magical time because it was a time of zero responsibilities,
Yeah.
except for the peer pressure from my professor. Um, but what did I want to say? I wanted to say something else. I'm not sure. But
I
I
have some thoughts about that, but go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Go no, you go for it. I was just gonna progress the stream.
This and this if this goes on a tangent, we can bring it back. But I'm reading a book right now called Free to Learn,
Mm.
and this resonates with me. Like what you just said about, hey, one of the reasons I like college is because I had zero responsibility. And one of the other pieces of it. Well, so this is like a paradox, and I haven't fully thought through this, but I think this is an interesting idea to explore. One of the paradoxes is as it gets easier to learn these skills, I almost want to take BCamp back to a more natural way to learn.
Mhm.
And so it's almost like this juxtaposition of like, yeah, we can use all this really modern technology, but let's go back to like how we learn naturally as humans, and that's not in a classroom. That's like this book talks about like all these studies uh from like hunter gatherer tribes, and
Mhm.
basically they learn by practicing
Yeah.
and watching other people,
Right.
um like interacting with people. So anyway, that was just an interesting, but and like and it was fun. Like what they found is that like learning should be fun. And
Yeah.
so this idea of like one of the schools that we took our kids to was a Sudbury school, which had zero curriculum actually. They
Oh.
literally just had a 2-acre lot. They had a library and a 3D printer and like all this stuff that the kids could do. They had a whole big garage with like musical instruments and stuff. Literally, the kids can do whatever they want. And the crazy thing is that the kids taught themselves and they were
Mm.
just fine. In fact, they were very like happy. And they still learn, kids learn on different timelines and stuff. You kind of have to like let go of sort of this like imposed idea that like everybody should be learning at the same speed, the same things. But it just opened my mind to like, wow, this like traditional education is very unnatural. Uh,
Yeah.
there's some funner ways to do it, I think.
No, that's insane. I remember when I first heard about B Camp, I think the thing that really did like surprise me was kind of the lack of lecture presence as compared to I think a lot of different programs that I see where they have guest speakers, there's a teacher kind of taking you through the whole thing. And like it also resonated with me because I just kept thinking about like my college experience of how so much of it was just project based work. Like I spent all that money on college, but I actually skipped all of my classes because I found the lectures incredibly not useful. I would just like
Yes.
read the textbook of like, okay, here's my assignment. I'm gonna break and tinker with things, and that's how
Mhm.
you learn. And then taking that a step further, I think when you said like hunter gatherer tribes, you like learn by watching other people. I feel like like working on my own and kind of the built-in assignments that college kind of gave me never really prepared me as a developer, to be honest, for like workforce. And like
Mhm.
when you mentioned like B camp as an internship, I feel like that's really when I like quote unquote leveled up, right, of like pair coding, which was so important. And I guess fun fact, or not fun fact, piece of advice for job seekers out there when people ask like engineers like, "Oh, what's culture like?" or like, how's work process? Find a company that does pair coding, especially for like beginner devs or like new grads, cuz that's really the only way you'll be able to function, right? Production level code, understand how to unit test. Like I think it's a core part of like yeah, I remember actually in my job seeking journey, um, one of the first jobs I interviewed for specifically called out that they don't do any group work. And like the questions were leading questions about like, why is it better to work individually than in a team? And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this exists. And everyone looks sad. And it was like pretty evident because I would talk, they had like a section where you like talk to an employee and yada yada. And then I'd ask them how they like work, and everyone would just like awkwardly like, scratch their like, ooh, this is a hard question. But yeah, I don't know. That's why I feel like B Camp was such a good, like when I heard about it, was like, wow, this really captures a bit of all those missing gaps that I just don't see. Right. And a bit of it though, I feel like it's hard to reproduce in a sense, though. It doesn't feel very scalable. I don't know if you've solved that problem or you want to solve that problem. I think either way could go, right? I mean, a bit of the exclusivity is nice. I think because
Yeah.
it lends itself to more specialization, more dedication from the developers. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, this is a good question. And couple of responses actually, because you mentioned a couple things I'll address before the
Yeah.
scalability question. Lectures. So we actually do bring in a guest speak. We bring in guest speakers because
Mm,
I think this is valuable, not necessarily for the nuts and bolts content, but it is valuable to hear from a professional about how they think about
yeah.
approaching problems. But we actually try to make it we try to broaden it as well. So like
Mhm.
we brought in this lady who I just randomly connected with on LinkedIn that's a professional at writing technical proposals.
Oh,
That
interesting.
was one of our absolute best guest speakers, and like something that you might not get, in another program when you're almost like too focused on
Mhm.
development skills. And so that one was amazing. We try to talk a lot about like job hunting skills because ultimately
Yeah.
like, I measure my success by how many people I can get jobs, like
Right.
good
Yeah.
roles, jobs that they're in a good company in a good role that fits them. And and so this is another area that's just I think a gap that like I have an MBA actually. I shouldn't admit
Mm.
that in a developer forum. A little bit shame, but I have a technical undergrad and an MBA, and basically, half of the MBA is just learning how to find a job, and it's really valuable, and it takes practice. So anyway, I get sidetracked on that, but to the idea of scale, I think this is relative. So I'll maybe put some guideposts how I think about it. In terms of like YouTube videos, um, definitely not as scalable as like a YouTube video. Compare it though to like traditional university, or even traditional boot camp. It's quite scalable compared to those things.
Mm.
Um, and and I think we are trying to scale it, but it's not necessarily my biggest goal. I
Mhm.
want to make it the best experience
Right.
possible, and um, and I think it's scalable enough. I mean, what?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, let
Yeah,
me
copy,
rephrase. It's
people
like
are going. If it works well, people are going to copy it, and there's going to be different options and stuff like that. And so there will be plenty of options. Like it's not. It's. I don't know if that's going to be the biggest bottleneck. I think
mm,
the biggest bottleneck is just it's like creating this two-sided network of like
right.
trusting it that there's good developers coming out of it, and the developers trusting that they can get a job. That's the
Right.
part of the thing. It's not the scale. We could scale it plenty if we needed to.
Oh, okay. Cool. Because I think my first thought was like, oh my God, this is so cool. How do we make like 10 copies of Richard so you can run 10 of these in parallel? I don't know. I don't know. That I think that was a bit of my like, oh, my eyes are so big because it's really cool, and I feel like it's a bit of a shame to an extent that at least in terms of the structure, I've only heard of BCamp, which makes it like very unique, right? And like the opportunity is smaller in
Yeah.
terms of how many people it could reach, or like not reach necessarily, how many people can like actively choose try to participate, right?
Yeah.
um and I
Well,
think
we're
that's a bit
taking
what I
spots.
meant by
Honestly, right now, the biggest thing for me is just capital to like,
yeah.
because honestly, I don't have to be in these sessions. Like I
Mm,
sort of engineered this environment, but I don't
yeah.
have to join every session. I have like on my last cohort that I ran, I actually had graduates from the previous cohort run it.
Oh, dope. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was my best cohort. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
So it's not like there's no special skill required in running it. So that's going to allow it to scale. And actually, like,
Right.
it can build itself from these graduates, and it gives them opportunities. That's how I think about, because it takes more than 6 weeks to like really develop a community and really
Right.
understand stuff. And so I'm thinking about, like, I want to grow it organically where people who go through it can help
Yeah.
contribute and they get paid, they're
Right, right.
so it gives
Oh,
them.
this is like the alumni network I searched through
Yeah,
right
but
here.
hopefully more like an engaging network where you can make money, an alumni network where you can make money.
Yeah, no,
Or
that's
participating.
that's awesome. And I do wanna I forgot to mention this that I thought was really cool is, like, the focus on teaching how to think versus just, like, the basic skills, which I think a lot of it is also what I got from pair programming early on and, like, watching other people do it because I wouldn't say, like, university was great at teaching me how to, like, architecture, technical project, right? And that was something I also only really got when I had that time with a person. And so I think the bringing in the lady who focuses on technical product like writing that's like that's not a thought that have crossed my mind in terms of like okay if I was to recruit guest speakers this is the type of person I'm looking for. So kudos to you. I mean, I'm definitely gonna try and steal that idea. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I also think really unique. So I do want to dive in, and we've already touched a lot of these already kind of in our general conversation, but focusing on the theme of this program, like what makes a successful developer program? And you mentioned this a bit already, but I think the first piece is like goal setting, right? Like what are the how do you set goals for a successful developer program?
Yeah. And are you talking about from the developer's point of view or from like
Probably
the organization?
both. Yeah?
Both. So, and actually, I try to align them, I guess, because like
Yeah.
my, I mentioned this briefly before, but like my North Star is getting people jobs.
Right.
And honestly, this every metric is sort of like a heuristic. You can't capture all of the value or all of like whether it's a good program just by a number or a few numbers.
Right.
But I think there are better numbers than other numbers, right? And I think
Right.
getting jobs is one that is a good number for us.
Mhm.
Um, and and because I think at the end of the day, that's what the developers want. They want to get jobs. That's also what the employers want, is they want to source good developers.
Right.
So that really aligns both sides of the two-sided network. Um, so I, and then I think as we mature, I think it'll be variations on that, like
Mhm.
quality of fit. Like we haven't done this, but like sending out surveys, like how well did that job
Yeah.
do? And so pushing that back down into the program, um, a couple things there. So one of the reasons I want to go through the entire development process
Mhm.
is to give people exposure to all the phases of the development process so that they can experience, oh, I really like doing front end design. You know, that's going to help them know themselves so
Mhm.
that they can get a job. And the other piece of this is we don't do grades. What we do actually is peer evaluations every week. And then we also have an expert panel of judges come in at the end to judge the projects. Um, but it's like not me giving grades. This kind of goes back to it being a little bit more scalable. Is like I'm trying to remove myself, like from. I want to create a system that works. But the peer evaluations I think are really fascinating, and people every week, everybody evaluates. They nominate an MVP for that week, and they also associate why. And we have 5 categories that are basically based on personality research. So we have like an innovator award, an architect award, like a sentinel award that's kind of a security thing, a designer award, and a diplomat. So every week people are nominating each other and trying to associate one of these categories. And so every week we sort of like highlight a winner that had the most nominations. And then at the very end, we have our 5 top people and their associated categories, which for me, this is super valuable data, both for the person and for the employer, to understand like it's actually, you know, it's quite different hiring somebody who's really innovative than like somebody who can just crank code. And it's quite rare to have somebody who's really good at both, or somebody who can just, maybe two, maybe they'll have two, but um, again, this idea of like basically your personality, your coding personality, as the people who are going to know this best are your teammates, the people that you're working with every day. So anyway, that's just some thoughts about how we're really trying to get the right data to then match people, because then people will reach out to me and be like, hey, we're looking for some developers. I can ask them a few questions, and then I can go back and look and see who got nominated the most for like an architecture type of role, or if they're an innovator, they might be a product manager or something. So anyway, thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I feel like it's a bit like a more accurate Myers-Briggs for I don't know, for the developer profile. To that point, I was curious from the perspective of, and maybe this is just you also sharing that information. Um, how do you find out what employers want, right? I'm assuming you also built up that network as well. Um, of projects interested in looking to hire? I think that's a big question. At least on my side,
Yeah.
um, navigating that I'm building in a vacuum, right? A bit.
You know, um, this is the biggest challenge for BCamp right now. Like we can get good developers. Actually, we've shown that we can get really good developers, and getting the people to hire has been slower. Um, Honestly, we wouldn't exist. I got to give a shout out to Justin Bibas if he ever listens to this, because he actually went through. I got going on another story, but my first foray into blockchain education was in a security boot camp. And interesting, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Yearn, but somebody had written a proposal and gotten funding from Yearn to run a security boot camp, and then had done nothing with it for a year. So one of my friends in Yearn was like, hey, Richard, we need someone to just come and like crack the whip and make this happen. So I was like, sweet. I was new. I'm like, I want to go meet some people. And so I just showed up and more or less just like got it started. Just cold emailing people, like cold emailing the developers to invite them in, and organizing the guest speakers and stuff, like the first foray into this. Anyway, Justin Bibas was in my very first cohort of Y Academy. And Y Academy developed and actually split off in an audit firm, because it was working well enough to have these people doing audits. And we did it, like I said, we were doing actual audits for people, but with lower expectations, saying, hey, these are new people, but we're going to do an audit. But they were doing audits well enough where like graduates from that program created another audit firm. Anyway, so that had a pretty good reputation for a little while. And Justin Bibas, and so when I started BCamp, he was like, and then he had since become the CEO of like this developer organization where he was doing development for other companies and stuff. So he needed to hire. He was the first believer in BCamp, and he's hired a bunch of developers from there. And so like I know him really well. And so he can just tell me like, this is what I need, and I'll find him somebody good. And so right now, this is the part that's not scalable actually so far, is um, finding the hiring people. We have enough to keep BCamp going, and we're talking to Optimism actually, and I actually got a grant from Optimism, so we've run a bunch of cohorts focused on Optimism. And so it does just take time though for a hiring partner to like trust that they're going to get good developers and to kind of understand how the system works. So if you have any wisdom to share, I'm all ears.
Yes, we can chat after I also do my kind of research and interviews and all of that. It is interesting from the perspective of your I guess like a boot camp is basically a product, right? And I
Mhm.
think in a
Yeah.
traditional product flow, you're like, oh, who is my target user? And then you go and interview them and things like that. But I think here it's like really your target audience is the kind of end of funnel hiring people. And it's like, oh, those are the people I need to pull into user interviews and understand motivations and challenges and successes and all those things. Um, but I guess I kind of also on the flip side, right? When we talk about successful developer programs, who's in your developer program does matter to an extent. Like you were
Yep.
making those first decisions on who to cold email, right? Like what lessons did you learn around there? Like what is a good developer, I guess, or a profile that people might want to look into?
Yeah. Excuse me. What we look for are a couple of things. I want basically to talk, I want people who are hands on. And so, and then we do actually have, we, we screen people before they get in. It's free, but you're not definitely not guaranteed admission into this. In fact, like the last boot camp we run, I think we had almost 300 applicants and we admitted 40 people. So it's fairly competitive in terms of getting in. And we just have a process like they do an application and then a video interview, and then I'm basically trying to weed people out who are not going to stick around, um, and who are not motivated to go build. Again, going back to that motivation theme a little bit. So this is an entirely different topic of like how to interview well, and all the research that I've read is like it's actually really really hard to be better than a coin flip at guessing whether somebody's going to be perform well. So um, more or less, with BCamp, I think one of the advantages to like an employer is we're trying to cast at least a pretty wide net, and filter people out, and then within that, 30 to 40 developers, you might find somebody that's a really good fit for your organization.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like maybe the pitch is actually B camp for hiring is like recruiting in a sense, right? People pay exorbitant amount of money to headhunters who kind of are making that 50-50 decision. I get an insane amount of like questions through my LinkedIn. They're like, "Are you interested?" I was like, "Have you read my profile? I don't matter to like this would be a horrible decision." Right? So I actually think that's really cool that you guys do that, and I think does point to at least a piece where it's like, okay, well, we've done at least one round of initial screening and like proving, over 6 weeks that this is like these are successful devs,
Yeah.
right? And it's like basically replicating the normal hiring process, right? Like every
Mm-hmm.
time I think like, oh, I need headcount, and then I'm just terrified of interviewing, and it's so expensive to get the wrong person
Mm-hmm.
as well. And like hiring someone, getting someone that like actually isn't able to execute and then having to let them go is very expensive. And then
Yep.
having to restart the entire hiring cycle just from like human hours is also very expensive. So I think that is a really valuable part of BCamp that I actually didn't think about until right now. Uh,
It shows that I haven't done my marketing very well. so a couple of notes on here actually is actually I don't think BCamp is really a competitor for Headhunter
okay.
because because usually if you're hiring a headhunter, you're trying to get somebody who's experienced, and
Yeah.
somebody who's really experienced is not going to go through BCamp. I'd say it should be, or like how I think about it, is more of a direct competitor to an internship.
Mm.
Um, and the advantages of using BCamp are, you know, you don't have to run your own internship.
Right. Yeah. 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 That's
And,
true.
you can get a little bit bigger pool. So if you
Yeah.
run an internship, you might have 2 to 5 people in it or something. But if you work with BCamp, then you can see 40 people, um,
Okay.
and don't have
Yes.
to run it. So that's, again, I haven't like completely figured out this pitch, obviously.
Right.
Um, and I think we're getting fairly close, but it's this whole machine of like actually getting in front of those people who are thinking about that,
Right.
and then getting them to understand and stuff is non-trivial.
Okay.
We're making progress, but that's how I think about it in terms of how it's positioned in the.
Would it work if I said not necessarily replacing headhunters, but just like general recruiters? Maybe. Oh man, are my recruiting friends gonna be like, Emily, you're you're like, putting me out of business? And it's like, oh, have you considered working for Richard?
Well, I don't know. BCamp's still small, and
Yeah.
it's not going to even make a dent. Honestly, initially, what I would love is just to talk to some recruiters, and they could look like rock stars if they just
Mm,
hire people from BCamp, and we've done a little bit of their work. Then
that's true.
not
Okay.
all their work, but like help source some people, because I mean that's how universities work too.
Right.
Universities don't replace recruiters.
That's fair. That's fair. No, you're absolutely correct. Okay. Things are forming more clearly in my head. And I mean, just generally, I think snowballing into more excitement on my end. I think I wanted to talk a little bit more about just like your view on self-service programs versus like limited cohorts. Obviously, you're in the limited cohort section. um, this is where I force you to say something nice about self-service programs, whether or not it's like something we still need. How could we make them more effective, if any?
Yeah,
um,
honestly, I love self-service programs.
yeah.
I have nothing but good things to say about them, and in fact, we rely on them. Right?
Right.
Like, I don't think this model is viable without good self-service options.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a couple that we like. In part of the interview process, you have to talk about a project, a Web3 project that you have worked on. And if
Right.
you have an example, we say, go do speedrun Ethereum, which is a phenomenal self-service program. I love Austin. He's spoken at BCamp.
Right.
Um, and and so like as part of the recruiting process, like that self-service building, like again, like I can't say enough good things about speedrun Ethereum, and I'm just glad I
Right.
got to go build it myself, because that's an entire, its own beast to tackle, to get people, because again, to like get into BCamp, you have to have already shown some initiative and done
Right.
some service
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then in addition to that, if people have questions about a specific topic, I send them to Patrick Collins. Like if I can answer it, I'll just answer it quickly. Or often, other people in the cohort can answer it or something.
Right.
There's actually surprisingly few questions that make it outside of the cohort. And little secret, I'm not the best developer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not a bad developer. I'm a pretty mediocre developer.
Right. Yeah.
I'm, I'm focused on this experience idea, but like if it does exceed that, then we send them to Patrick Collins and say, go watch this video. And he's awesome. So yeah, I have nothing bad to say about self-service options. I think it's almost required for
Right.
something like this to work. And even like with my education with my own kids, I couldn't have done what we did without, some little kid things like Prodigy, and like there's these self-service options that are phenomenal, that are, take away a lot of what teachers have done in the past, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, it allows us to really focus on the connections and the motivation and some of these other things.
Yeah. Okay. Now that makes sense. It's kind of like pick your path, right? Which
Mhm.
direction are you going? And both are requisite for like building new, primitives in education. What do they look like outside of traditional programs? Um, so absolutely. And then I want to say maybe one last question or discussion topic is just getting your advice on building community, right? I think there's probably an obvious entrance point where maybe it's like, okay, I'm just ascribing scenarios to you and tell me again whether or not I'm right or wrong, or somewhere in the middle of like I think the first step to building community, maybe in regards to BCamp, maybe not, is just failing together. Is one of that. Oh, I think you mentioned the assigning people to projects. That was really interesting. Um, I think it's probably something you have to do in a remote environment, but also just like even if this was IRL in a classroom, like, oh my God, that is so much better than me like being the last one in line picking for the volleyball team and just feeling terrible about myself. I'm like, teacher, like gym coach, like please make somebody else pick rather than like facing the ire of other mean kids on the playground. Yeah.
Yeah, this is an interesting question to me, and I'm going to have a little bit maybe of a cynical
Yeah.
response to it, which probably reflects in like B camp community. But first of all, this idea of teams. So I sort of I differentiate personal relationships from like a broader community,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they're related, but I think the incentives are actually quite different. And so, in terms of the individual relationships and like selecting teams, we've tried a bunch of different stuff. In terms like the very first cohorts, it was like you can be on a team if you want. It was like just a free for all, and some people just built our project solo and did fine actually. Um, like one person did fine, you know. One person like really excelled, and everybody half the rest of the cohort just completely uh, torpedoed and
Mm-hmm.
imploded. Um, all the way to like, we've had more like the partnering organizations choose their teams, but more or less how we've ended up is similar to what you said. We do take people's preferences, but I try to get a lot of data like, hey, what are your top 5 projects out of 10? And this actually works pretty well to like people want to be on a project that they want to work on. They
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily want to choose their teammates, because we've
Mm.
had like places where you're like trying to vote and like try to choose who you want on your team, and it didn't work very well. But this process we have now, where we just get people's preferences and then we just assign them to a project, and then we're just like, hey, this is your team. It actually works quite well. Um, and one, we're always tweaking this though, because there's still projects that like the team quite never quite gels, and it just
Mm-hmm.
explodes. We're down to like maybe 1 out of 10 teams for that happening to, which in my mind is like phenomenal for a free program.
Right. Yeah.
We'll maybe lose 1 or 2 more throughout if as um, things drop off, but we try to catalyze this reaction. I think a little bit like a chemical reaction, where we assign the teams, and we just made this change, and it's been great. Where we assign the teams and we get them together in the first live session, we just do a Zoom breakout, put everybody
Mm-hmm.
in their teams, and just simple thing like asking an icebreaker question and having people tell a little bit about their journey to
Mm-hmm.
each other. That little question creates so much staying power
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of the cohort, and it greases the skids for people to work well together. And what's crazy is like we've had teams that really gelled, and these are really fun to watch. they can do 3x what a team that doesn't gel. Easy, 310x the work, and have a much better experience.
Mm-hmm.
Their team gels, this is fascinating to me. So anyway, teams. This is we think a lot about this, and it's important. In the broader community, I haven't figured this out. I don't know if I'm maybe not the right person to think through this. But I think about it, and I want you to like challenge me, maybe, because I'm doing something wrong here. But I think about it a little bit as like an economy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people are going to be engaged if you can make money long
That's
term.
true. This is
And
so
I, and
true.
I and I I don't I don't use financial incentives in the program because I don't know if that it's not really a short term incentive. It's more of like a structural incentive. Like, getting somebody a job is worth more than winning a hackathon prize, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so it's like the long term economic structure of it is really important. And so I don't do a lot of like, we're always like trying to keep people informed on social media and in our Discord and stuff. But basically, the Discord is like dead
Mm-hmm.
between cohorts. And I feel a little bad, but I'm just like, you know what? Like, I don't really want to just post fluff just to like
Right.
get eyeballs. I want to create something that's now, where we're moving, which I'm really starting to like, is these ideas of like giving people opportunities to contribute where we can pay them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in subsequent cohorts and engaging in the community that way, I think there's real. This is a powerful idea, I think. Um,
Right.
so
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what to challenge you on, in the sense that I do think like building the idea of this like self-sustained community where people are on their own, a bit kumbaya, and will like interact and do like personal stuff is hard to reproduce, also not necessarily required for certain use cases. I think BCamp, your goal is to get devs in jobs, right? And like, ideally, I mean, not ideally, like, oh man, sometimes, it's like I work too hard to have time to join a Discord community and just talk to a bunch of online people.
yeah.
But I mean, everything is kind of what you call personal preference. I think part of it is like the most successful communities that I've seen in terms of like that style have been ones that like adopted sort of two things, I guess, maybe like have been able to reach an IRL component,
Mm-hmm.
um that the
Oh, that's
human
crucial.
connection keeps them wanting to talk to each other online. I think the other piece is like when it's incredibly niche. Like Bcamp is niche in the sense that it is like web3, but I think when I talk about it's just like even more like I'm specifically interested in this NFT,
Mm-hmm.
or um like I care specifically about this very niche EIP in Ethereum, right? And like that's something that where I've seen like very successful communities rally around. I think the other piece too is like also like what kind of community you look for, and this is probably where we tweak like goal setting, right? If
Mm-hmm.
your goals are just like get numbers of people active, like active Discord messages and things like that, that's fine and everything. But I think what's really interesting is actually my friend, this is completely not web3, but he's building a community of like early social influencers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like two-sided, where it's like part of the community is he selected, I think, like in the beginning, just like 10 people who were all like growing TikTok influencers, but they didn't necessarily have um all the tools at hand. So it was a mix of like mostly growing and then a few experts there to kind of like chat. And I mean, like TikTok influencing is also, I would say, pretty niche, and something I
Mm-hmm.
would want to talk about relatively often. And then on the flip side too, he brought in a very small cohort of maybe like 10 people and then plus one expert of how do you look for the right type of like influencer to hire for your project,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then having discussions around that. And that's more open ended because I think people are probably hiring or thinking about this 24/7 versus maybe in like BCamp's case, because it is cohort based, there's that kind of lull in the middle. And I think that's totally fine, right? Because your incentives and your goals don't revolve around that kind of activity.
Yeah.
Um, so I wouldn't sweat it, is what I'm saying. Uh,
Well, I like that. And what that makes me think about is, some of our more long-term plans.
mhm.
Like this is another. We only have 3 minutes, so this is a super interesting topic. I want to keep B Camp relatively small, actually,
Right. Yeah.
because one of the things that motivated me to start B Camp is working for a corporation, and
Right.
they're just basically like a widget, and it's dehumanizing. And I think the biggest lever there is how small the organization is. I think a small organization can be more like a team. Um, but anyway, the so once BCamp is scaled enough where there's sort of like it can support 30 people or something, I do want to move into more like research and
Mm,
like a university. I think one of the ways a university creates a community is because they're on the cutting edge of research and they're creating peer-reviewed articles that are pushing science forward, um, or whatever field that they're in. And so that's how I see the evolution of our community,
mm.
is like, once we sort of establish this baseline of like, yeah, we can get people jobs and we have a big enough market on both sides, and we can make it really excellent, then I don't want to scale it to be a billion,
Yeah. Yeah.
billion developers jobs. I would want to scale it to creating research that could help a billion developers.
Yeah.
It's a
Super interesting. Different ways to think about it. But anyways, yes, we are almost at time. This has been a really cool conversation. We've explored a lot. I usually like to end on 3 takeaways, but there's way too many takeaways. So I'm going to end on the question that's actually the most important. Um, is if you were a type of soup, what kind of soup would you be?
I love these type of questions, man. Broccoli cheddar.
Okay. Yes.
It's like, it's so like satisfying, and like you can eat a broccoli cheddar soup and you don't have to eat anything else. You get your veggies, beans, and it's just so rich.
Yeah, no, I love broccoli cheddar soup too. So I'm glad I got to talk to broccoli cheddar soup today. But yeah, okay, cool. Thanks again for your time. I'm gonna hit end stream and we can chat later.
Yeah,
Uh,
thank you so much for having me. You're awesome, Emily.